The sky above eastern Louisiana burned with a strange, fiery glow that night, a stark reminder of how fragile life can be. In the quiet of homes, families were startled awake by the sound of sirens, the distant rumble of an explosion, and the piercing wail of emergency alarms cutting through the night. Smoke climbed toward the heavens, thick and relentless, a shadow that threatened to overwhelm everything in its path. The streets, once alive with laughter and familiar rhythms, became corridors of uncertainty, as neighbors peeked through curtains, searching for signs of safety, for signs that their world was still intact. For those at the manufacturing plant, the explosion was sudden, violent, and terrifying. Moments that should have been ordinary, clocking in for a shift, tending to machines, talking with colleagues, turned into a blur of fire, chaos, and fear. Families outside held their breaths, hearts pounding, waiting for word, praying for a sign that their loved ones were safe. In that darkness, time slowed, every second stretching into an eternity, each one heavier than the last. But even amidst the smoke and uncertainty, there was a quiet pulse of courage. A mother hugged her child tighter, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Neighbors ran into the streets, offering blankets, water, and comfort to those who had fled the danger. Firefighters charged toward the flames with unwavering determination, their faces streaked with soot and resolve. And somewhere, in the midst of fear, a city collectively lifted its gaze skyward, finding strength in faith, in hope, in the knowledge that even the darkest night gives way to dawn. Disasters, sudden and unforgiving, test the very core of our being. They strip away comfort, challenge our courage, and force us to confront fragility. Yet, it is in these moments, when smoke rises and sirens scream, when homes are evacuated and lives are shaken, that the human spirit reveals its true power. It is in these moments that hope refuses to be extinguished, that resilience quietly blooms, and that communities discover the boundless strength that comes when hearts unite in the face of adversity. Tonight, eastern Louisiana stands at a crossroads, between fear and faith, despair and determination, loss and the promise of renewal. And as the flames reach skyward, so too does the spirit of the people, rising with it, undaunted, unbroken, and unyielding. This is the story of courage in chaos, of hope in the fire, of a community that refuses to be defined by tragedy. It is a story that reminds us, even when everything seems lost, that from the ashes, something beautiful can, and will, emerge. The morning after the explosion, the streets of eastern Louisiana were quiet, but the silence was heavy. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it presses down like a weight, reminding every resident of the night before. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling through neighborhoods like a ghost, and the distant hum of fire trucks and emergency vehicles served as a persistent echo of chaos. Those who had evacuated were returning to streets that looked familiar yet foreign, their homes untouched physically but touched forever by the shadow of fear. Families awoke with hearts still racing, trying to reconcile what had happened. The mind struggles with moments that defy reason, an ordinary day exploding into tragedy, lives uprooted in an instant. For some, the shock was paralyzing. Parents searched for children who were at school, workers for colleagues who hadn't returned, neighbors for familiar faces now absent. Phones rang endlessly. Some answered with relief, others met with silence that pierced deeper than the flames themselves. Mrs. Laverne Johnson stood outside her small house, her hands trembling as she clutched her favorite prayer book. She had been woken by the explosion itself, a violent shock that rattled windows and hearts alike. Her son, who worked the night shift at the plant, hadn't called yet. With each minute that passed, a storm of fear built within her chest. The rational part of her mind whispered, "He is safe. He must be safe." But the rest of her, the part that felt the tremor of the world shifting beneath her feet, trembled with disbelief. She was not alone. Across the town, stories mirrored hers. A young father running to the phone for word of his wife, a grandmother praying for her grandchildren, neighbors embracing strangers in shared fear. Shock is universal, but it is also deeply personal. Each heart processed it differently. In tears, in silence, in frantic motion. And yet, in this collective pause, a subtle truth emerged. Humanity refuses to stay broken for long. First responders were already at work, their faces marked with soot and determination. Firefighters, paramedics, and police officers moved with a disciplined urgency that belied the chaos around them. They worked in silence and in solidarity, understanding something profound, that while the fire could destroy walls and machinery, it could not destroy courage. They carried not just hoses and stretchers, but the promise of hope. Each life saved, each hand held, each small gesture of care was a spark in the darkness, a reminder that even in catastrophe, the human spirit endures. In the heart of the city, a group of workers who had escaped the plant gathered in the church across from the main street. Shaken, soot-streaked, some injured, they sat together in silence. Reverend Marcus, a man known for his gentle voice and unwavering faith, approached them with calm determination. "I know this feels impossible," he said. "I know the world seems upside down, but we are not abandoned. The fire is real, but so is the love that surrounds us. We are here together, and we will find our way through this." Tears flowed freely that morning. Some wept for themselves, some for colleagues, some for the city they had loved and feared might be lost. And yet, within these tears, a quiet strength began to grow. It is often in moments of vulnerability that courage is born. It is in the surrender of disbelief that faith can take root. Even as the smoke lingered, as streets were cordoned off, as news spread of damage and loss, hearts began to awaken to a profound truth. Life continues, and we are not powerless. Stories of shock intertwined with moments of clarity. A young nurse, Hannah, had been walking to her car when the explosion shook the pavement beneath her feet. Fear rooted her to the spot, but she noticed an elderly man struggling to breathe, caught in the cloud of smoke that had drifted into the neighborhood. Without thinking, she ran to him, guiding him to safety. Later, as she recounted the moment, she realized that even in disbelief, human instincts of care and compassion endure. The fire was terrifying, but it could not extinguish her courage. Across the city, families began to share meals in church halls, offering food, blankets, and comfort to those displaced. Small acts of kindness became lifelines. One woman, Mrs. Nguyen, baked bread and handed it to evacuees, saying, "We may have lost our night's sleep, but we can give each other hope today." These gestures, humble and human, reminded everyone that even when shock threatens to immobilize, action restores purpose. Spiritual reflection became an anchor. For many, prayer was not just a ritual, but a lifeline. Hands clasped, eyes closed, voices whispered across homes and streets. Prayers for safety, for healing, for resilience. Faith, in its many forms, provided a framework to understand the chaos, to see beyond the immediate terror, and to envision a path forward. "The Lord is near to the broken-hearted," a neighbor whispered, quoting scripture, "and saves those who are crushed in spirit." In moments like these, words that had once seemed distant took on vivid, life-saving meaning. By midday, the shock was beginning to transform. Conversations shifted from disbelief to plans, from fear to action. Volunteers began coordinating temporary housing, donations, and transportation. Local businesses opened their doors to provide water, food, and blankets. Neighbors checked in on each other, offering reassurance and presence. Slowly, the paralysis of shock began to give way to something stronger, a quiet determination that the city would endure. Yet, the emotional journey was not linear. Waves of disbelief returned with every siren, every smoke plume, every new report of damage. Healing would not be immediate, and recovery would not be easy. But even in the uncertainty, a foundation was being laid, built on courage, community, and faith. People realized that while they could not undo the explosion, they could choose how to respond, with fear or with hope, with despair or with resilience. By evening, families huddled together, recounting stories of survival, of escape, of unexpected kindness. Children, exhausted but safe, lay in beds that night with parents whispering words of comfort, reinforcing the truth that life continues and that love endures. And somewhere in the city, as the sun set behind a smoky horizon, hearts collectively whispered a quiet vow: "We will rise. We will rebuild. We will not be broken." Shock had come, uninvited and overwhelming. But it had also revealed a deeper truth. In moments of disbelief, humanity discovers its strength, courage finds its voice, and communities learn the transformative power of hope. And this, the people of eastern Louisiana realized, was only the beginning of their journey. Not just to recover what was lost, but to emerge stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. In the aftermath of disaster, the first faces that meet the chaos are often those we call heroes. They do not wear capes. They do not seek recognition. But they run toward danger when others flee, offering strength when fear threatens to paralyze. The explosion at the manufacturing plant in eastern Louisiana revealed such heroes. Firefighters charging into flames, neighbors braving smoke-filled streets, volunteers opening their homes to strangers. And in their courage, the city discovered a truth that burns brighter than any fire. Humanity's capacity for bravery is infinite. Captain Elijah Sanders of the local fire department had been on duty for years, but nothing could have prepared him for the scale of that night. The moment the explosion erupted, he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but also the weight of responsibility pressing against his chest. He could see the fire licking at the edges of the plant, hear the panicked screams, smell the smoke thickening the air. Yet he did not hesitate. With every step toward the inferno, he carried not just hoses and axes, but hope, the hope of saving lives, the hope of bringing order to chaos. Alongside him were his team, each person moving with a silent agreement. We are here, and we will not falter. They rescued workers trapped under debris, guided families through the streets to safety, and stood unwavering as flames threatened to consume everything in their path. One young firefighter, barely 20 years old, spoke later of fear coursing through his veins. Yet he admitted that every time he lifted a hand to pull someone to safety, a calm washed over him. In the moment, he said, you realize fear is just the shadow of courage. And courage is stronger than any explosion. The heroes were not only uniformed responders. Across neighborhoods, ordinary citizens became extraordinary. Mrs. Tanisha Harper ran toward the site after hearing of the explosion. Her heart raced and smoke stung her eyes, but she carried blankets, water, and a determination she did not know she possessed. Alongside her, neighbors formed human chains, helping the injured to ambulances, comforting frightened children, and reassuring the elderly that they were not alone. In moments of terror, their humanity shone brighter than the flames. Even children became small heroes. Little Jaden, only 8 years old, ran alongside his mother handing bottled water to first responders, his small hands gripping the cold plastic tightly. He asked questions, learned names, offered smiles, and in his innocence reminded everyone that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, steady, and persistent, the way hope is. Stories of heroism were everywhere, multiplying like sparks in a fire. The local grocery store owner, seeing families stranded without food, opened his doors to anyone who needed sustenance. A retired nurse set up a first aid station on her front porch. Volunteers coordinated transportation for those displaced, moving people from temporary shelters to relatives' homes with efficiency born of compassion. Every act, no matter how small, became a thread in the fabric of recovery. Spiritual strength ran through these acts of heroism. Many heroes, from the firefighters to the volunteers, attributed their courage to prayer, faith, and belief in something greater than themselves. Captain Sanders later admitted that in the midst of the chaos, he silently prayed for every life, for every family, for the city he loved. I don't know why I was spared fear when others were in danger, he said. But I believe I was given the strength to act, to serve, and to protect. For many, faith was not abstract. It was tangible in every decision, every act of bravery. The city watched and learned. As smoke rose in the distance, residents understood that heroes are not only those who stand in front of danger, they are those who lift others when the world feels heavy. It is in selflessness, in service, in the willingness to give without expectation, that true heroism emerges. And in recognizing these acts, the community began to see that even in tragedy, there is light. Yet, heroism is not without its cost. Many who ran toward danger did so at great personal risk. Exhaustion, injury, and fear shadowed every moment. But each hero, in their dedication, revealed a lesson that resonates beyond disaster. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the resolve to act in spite of it. Courage is not the absence of doubt, but the choice to move forward even when uncertainty looms. Families, too, became unsung heroes in their own right. Parents who comforted children while waiting for news, neighbors who offered shelter, and friends who reassured one another through trembling hands and whispered words all embodied heroism. In their love and presence, they provided a lifeline, a reminder that heroism is not only in dramatic feats, but in persistence, empathy, and care. As the hours passed, the city began to weave a narrative of hope through these acts. Social media lit up with stories of bravery, firefighters saving workers from collapsing structures, volunteers delivering water and supplies, strangers carrying each other through thick smoke. The explosion had shaken the city, but it could not destroy the spirit that bound it together. Every act of heroism became a beacon, guiding hearts away from despair and toward belief in human goodness. Spiritual reflection intertwined with admiration for these heroes. Many saw the explosion not only as a test but also as a calling, a reminder that life is fragile and that the gifts of courage, compassion, and service are divine in nature. Reverend Marcus, who had led the evening prayer the day before, said, "The flames did not choose whom to destroy, but courage and love chose whom to inspire. And in their choosing, we are reminded that God walks with us through every trial." By nightfall, the first wave of emergency response had stabilized the immediate danger. But the city's real recovery had just begun. Residents, inspired by the bravery of those who had faced the flames, began to consider their own roles in rebuilding. Courage, they realized, was contagious. The more it was witnessed, the more it grew. One volunteer remarked, "When you see someone risking everything for a stranger, you realize that you too can do something, no matter how small. We are stronger together than we are alone." The explosion had left a mark on eastern Louisiana, one that would not fade with the smoke. Yet, in the wake of tragedy, heroes had emerged, ordinary people performing extraordinary acts. Their bravery, love, and faith illuminated the city in ways no fire could ever dim. They reminded everyone that when disaster strikes, hope is not passive, it is active. It is the courage to act, the resolve to care, and the faith that together, a community can endure anything. Even as families continued to process shock and disbelief, they held close the stories of heroism. They shared tales of firefighters guiding workers through flames, neighbors carrying blankets to the displaced, and children offering smiles that lifted weary hearts. These stories, retold around tables, over phones, and in prayer circles, became a lifeline, a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, light persists, carried by the hands and hearts of those willing to rise. The city learned a vital truth: disasters may test us, but they cannot define us. Heroes emerge not only from institutions but from every heart willing to act. Courage, faith, and love are more powerful than any explosion. And as eastern Louisiana looked toward the days ahead, it carried with it a renewed understanding. The strength of a community lies in its people, and the light of heroes shines brightest when darkness surrounds them. In the days following the explosion, eastern Louisiana awoke to a city transformed. The streets bore the scars of fire and chaos, and smoke still curled into the sky as a silent reminder of the night that had shaken hearts and homes alike. But amid the debris, something more profound began to take shape, a community united, resilient, and unwavering in its determination to rise. People who had once been strangers now became neighbors in the truest sense. Families who lost homes were welcomed into the open doors of those who had not. Local churches, schools, and community centers became shelters, kitchens, and meeting spaces for planning relief. Volunteers coordinated tirelessly, delivering food, blankets, and emotional support to anyone in need. Each act, each effort, each word of encouragement became a thread weaving a tapestry of hope across the city. Mrs. Laverne Johnson, whose son had narrowly escaped the explosion, opened her home to 3 families displaced by the disaster. Her small living room, once a quiet space for her family, now overflowed with children laughing softly despite the fear in their eyes, mothers sharing stories of survival, and fathers exchanging contact information to coordinate jobs and support. In this chaos, Mrs. Johnson realized something profound. The strength of a community is measured not by wealth or power, but by the willingness of its members to stand together when life threatens to tear them apart. Stories of collective resilience emerged from every corner. A local bakery, whose ovens had been damaged by the explosion, became a hub for volunteers, offering bread and pastries to anyone arriving at the nearby shelter. Children, inspired by the courage of adults, organized small initiatives of their own: lemonade stands to raise funds for families in need, handmade cards to encourage first responders, and small gestures that reminded everyone that hope can be expressed in countless ways. One striking example of unity came from a group of neighbors in a block that had been heavily impacted by the explosion. With debris scattered across yards and streets, they organized a cleanup brigade. Armed with gloves, brooms, and determination, they worked side by side from sunrise to sunset, clearing rubble, helping each other repair fences, and restoring a sense of order to a world temporarily fractured by disaster. In these moments, physical labor became symbolic. Every piece of debris removed, every broken window replaced, was an act of reclaiming life, dignity, and hope. Spirituality infused this unity with deeper meaning. Many residents turned to prayer circles, candlelight vigils, and quiet meditation as tools for healing and grounding. Reverend Marcus, whose church had served as a temporary shelter, spoke of the profound energy created when a community prays together. "When hearts unite in faith, the weight of fear is halved," he said. "When hands join in service, the burden of despair diminishes. In unity, there is strength beyond measure." These words resonated deeply as people experienced firsthand the power of collective hope. The city's schools became centers of resilience as well. Teachers and administrators opened their doors, providing space for children who had been evacuated or traumatized. They organized activities designed not only to educate but to heal. Art classes where children drew pictures of hope, writing workshops where they expressed fear and gratitude, and group exercises that reminded them they were not alone. Through these initiatives, young hearts learned that even when life is disrupted, they can still contribute to the healing of their community. Local businesses joined the effort, offering both practical support and symbolic strength. Grocery stores provided free meals, gas stations offered fuel to volunteers, and hardware stores donated materials for rebuilding homes and repairing streets. Each contribution reinforced a critical truth: recovery is not the responsibility of a few, it is the shared labor of every willing heart. The emotional power of unity became evident in unexpected moments. In one shelter, an elderly man named Mr. Caldwell, who had lost his home entirely, began sharing stories of past storms and hardships that the city had endured. His voice, steady and rich with experience, reminded everyone that resilience is cultivated over generations. He spoke not with despair, but with pride, emphasizing that the same hands that had once rebuilt the city could do so again. His words became a balm to those struggling with loss, a reminder that hope is timeless, and unity is enduring. Acts of unity extended beyond human interaction. Strangers comforted each other in moments of silent grief, children offered smiles to calm frightened peers, and neighbors cooked meals for families they had never met. Each gesture, no matter how small, contributed to a growing sense that together, the community was larger than its individual hardships. The explosion had created chaos, but in response, people discovered a force even stronger than fire: the power of collective care. This unity was not just practical, it was profoundly emotional and spiritual. The people of eastern Louisiana learned that community is more than proximity. It is presence, empathy, and shared commitment. When neighbors lift one another in times of crisis, they are not only rebuilding homes, they are rebuilding faith, hope, and trust in the human spirit. Every smile offered, every hand extended, every prayer shared reinforced the invisible threads connecting each person to the whole. As recovery efforts continued, a pattern emerged. Those who gave help often found themselves strengthened in unexpected ways. Volunteers reported a sense of fulfillment that surpassed their exhaustion. Families who received support often became advocates and helpers themselves, creating a cycle of giving that expanded the city's capacity for resilience. In this, there was a profound spiritual lesson: strength grows when shared, and hope multiplies when nurtured together. By the end of the week, the city's heartbeat was stronger. Roads were cleared, shelters organized, and families beginning to return to routines. Yet, beneath the visible recovery, an even more important transformation had occurred: a renewed sense of unity. Eastern Louisiana had endured a sudden, terrifying disaster, but in the face of it, the community had discovered an enduring truth: when people stand together, no challenge is insurmountable. Reverend Marcus reflected on this as he addressed a gathering of volunteers and residents. "The fire was devastating," he said, "but it did not destroy our spirit. Look around you. Look at these hands, these hearts, these faces. This is what resilience looks like. This is what hope looks like. Together, we are unbreakable." His words, met with quiet nods and soft tears, crystallized the lesson of the week. Strength is not found in isolation, but in unity. Even as rebuilding continued, the people carried with them a new perspective. Disasters, they realized, expose not only vulnerability but also potential. The potential for courage, for compassion, and for connection. The explosion had taken much, but it had also revealed the limitless capacity of a community to care, to act, and to love. And so, Eastern Louisiana moved forward, not simply as individuals recovering from tragedy, but as a united body, bound by shared experience, strengthened by collective courage, and inspired by the understanding that together they could face anything. In their unity, they found not only survival, but the blueprint for a brighter, stronger future. When disaster strikes, fear often arrives first. It lingers in the air, wrapping itself around hearts and minds, whispering doubts, and casting shadows over even the brightest moments. The explosion at the manufacturing plant in eastern Louisiana was no exception. The smoke had barely cleared, and yet fear still lingered. Fear for lives lost, fear for homes damaged, fear for the uncertain days ahead. But amid this fear, something remarkable began to surface. Faith. A quiet, unshakable faith that whispered, "We are not alone, we will endure, and light will return." Faith took many forms in those first days. For some, it was prayer, a soft murmuring of words lifted toward the heavens, hands clasped, eyes closed, hearts open. Families gathered in living rooms, kitchens, and churches, leaning on one another and on God's promise of protection. Children, sensing the anxiety of adults, instinctively joined in, their voices small yet pure, adding a layer of hope that transcended the fear surrounding them. For Mrs. Laverne Johnson, faith became her anchor. Each morning, before venturing out to help displaced families or check on neighbors, she would kneel beside her bed, whispering prayers for safety, strength, and wisdom. The act itself was simple, but it reminded her, and those around her, that even when the world felt unstable, a higher power remained steadfast. Her son, though shaken by the explosion, found comfort in these morning prayers, realizing that faith can transform fear into courage, one whispered word at a time. Faith also manifested in the courage of first responders. Captain Elijah Sanders, whose team had faced the immediate danger of the fire, spoke often of the role of belief in guiding action. "When I entered the building that night, fear was there, yes," he said. "But there was also a sense that something greater than me was guiding my hands, steadying my heart, and protecting those in my care." Faith is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to act despite it. Across the city, faith inspired countless acts of hope and service. Volunteers who arrived at shelters and community centers often spoke of a sense of calling, a pull they could not explain but could not ignore. They comforted strangers, distributed meals, and assisted with logistics, motivated not by recognition but by an inner sense of purpose. In these moments, faith was both a guiding light and a source of strength, reminding everyone that even the smallest actions matter in the tapestry of recovery. The spiritual energy of the city was palpable during candlelight vigils held for those impacted by the explosion. Streets once filled with chaos became quiet havens for reflection. Families, friends, and even strangers gathered together, holding candles, sharing stories, and offering prayers for healing and protection. Each flickering flame symbolized hope, a beacon of light in a landscape still shadowed by fear. Children drew pictures of sunshine, rainbows, and heroes, their innocence reminding everyone that faith can also be expressed through simple acts of creativity and belief. For some, faith offered comfort in the midst of profound grief. Families who lost loved ones clung to the assurance that their absence did not mean abandonment. "I can't explain why this happened," whispered one mother who had lost her husband in the blast, "but I believe he is with God, and that somehow he will help us find the strength to continue." Her words, spoken through tears, reminded everyone that faith is not always about understanding. It is about trusting, even when answers are elusive, and moving forward even when hearts are heavy. Faith also strengthened the sense of community. As people prayed together, volunteered together, and shared their fears and hopes, an invisible bond formed. It was as though the city itself was infused with spiritual energy, a collective belief that together they could overcome the tragedy. This unity of faith transcended differences in age, background, or belief system. In the shared desire for safety, healing, and restoration, all were equal, all were connected, and all were empowered. Children, in particular, demonstrated the extraordinary ways that faith can manifest in resilience. Little Jaden, who had handed water to first responders the night of the explosion, began organizing small prayer circles at the shelter, inviting his peers to pray for the injured, for the displaced, and for the firefighters. His innocence, combined with his unwavering belief that good could triumph over fear, inspired those around him. Adults, exhausted and overwhelmed, found themselves comforted by the unshakable faith of a child, realizing that hope is contagious when shared openly and sincerely. Faith also provided a framework for meaning. Many residents reflected on the lessons the disaster had imparted. Lessons about courage, love, empathy, and perseverance. The explosion, while devastating, became an opportunity for spiritual growth and reflection. Reverend Marcus reminded his congregation, "Faith does not promise that life will be easy. It promises that in every trial, in every fire, there is a hand guiding you, a purpose beyond your understanding, and a hope that never dies." Through faith, fear was transformed. Panic gave way to planning, despair to determination, and uncertainty to action. People found strength not only in prayer but in service. Feeding a neighbor, comforting a child, helping a volunteer. Every act became a manifestation of belief in goodness, a living testament that faith and action are inseparable. In quiet moments, residents reflected on the resilience faith had inspired. Families huddled together at night, whispering words of comfort, recounting stories of heroism, and offering prayers for safety and healing. The city, scarred yet steadfast, began to awaken to a profound truth. Fear may visit, but faith endures. Fear shakes, but faith steadies. Fear overwhelms, but faith guides. By the end of the week, the city was still healing, but hearts were stronger. Faith had turned fear into focus, despair into hope, and uncertainty into courage. Residents realized that while the explosion had tested them, it had also revealed their capacity to trust, to believe, and to act with love and compassion. Faith in the midst of fear is not passive, it is active. It is the courage to face uncertainty with hope, the resolve to act with compassion despite trepidation, and the belief that even in the darkest of circumstances, light will find a way. Eastern Louisiana, scarred but unbroken, began to embrace this truth. The city had learned that faith, when lived through action, prayer, and unity, becomes a source of resilience more powerful than any disaster. And so, in the days that followed the explosion, the people of Eastern Louisiana stood together, hands lifted, hearts open, eyes focused on the horizon. They prayed, they helped, they comforted, and they believed, not only in survival but in the promise of renewal. For in faith, fear loses its grip, courage emerges, and hope becomes unstoppable. Loss is a heavy companion. It does not arrive politely or with warning. It comes uninvited, leaving hearts bruised and lives rearranged. In eastern Louisiana, the aftermath of the manufacturing plant explosion brought loss in many forms. Homes damaged, jobs disrupted, possessions destroyed, and, most painfully, lives altered in ways that cannot be measured by material means alone. Trauma, like smoke after a fire, lingered in the air, touching everyone in the community, whether directly affected or bearing witness from a distance. For many, the first days were a blur of emotions. Shock, grief, disbelief, and anger mingling in a swirling storm. Families sifted through the wreckage of their homes, trying to grasp what remained and what had been taken. Some discovered that belongings they had cherished for years were reduced to ash or rubble. Others faced the uncertainty of unemployment or displacement. And beneath it all lay a deeper ache, the knowledge that life, as they had known it, had been irrevocably changed. Yet amid this loss, the human spirit began its quiet, miraculous work of healing. Mrs. Laverne Johnson, whose home had been damaged, spoke of the first moments after she returned to assess the wreckage. She could have succumbed to despair, but instead she took a deep breath, knelt beside the remnants of her living room, and whispered a prayer, "Lord, help me see not what is gone, but what can still grow." In that simple act, she planted the first seeds of resilience, reminding herself that loss, though real and painful, does not have the power to destroy hope. For some, trauma revealed itself in ways that were invisible but no less profound. Children struggled with nightmares, adults wrestled with anxiety, and even those who had physically escaped unscathed felt the tremors of fear long after the flames were extinguished. Recognizing the importance of mental and emotional care, community leaders and volunteers organized counseling sessions, support groups, and safe spaces for sharing. These efforts acknowledged a critical truth. Recovery is not only about rebuilding structures, but also about healing hearts and minds. One particularly moving story was that of the Rivera family. Their home had been partially destroyed, forcing them to live temporarily in a community shelter. The father, Miguel, struggled with anger and frustration, while the mother, Elena, felt a deep sadness that seemed unending. Their children, scared and disoriented, clung to their parents for reassurance. It was in the shelter, through group therapy and shared meals with neighbors, that the Rivera family began to find a path forward. They realized that while the explosion had taken much, it had also offered a gift: the opportunity to rebuild not just their home, but their relationships, their priorities, and their sense of purpose. Healing after trauma is rarely linear. There were days of progress followed by moments of regression. Some mornings brought courage and hope, while evenings brought exhaustion and tears. But with each small step forward, the city learned a profound lesson. Resilience is not about avoiding pain, it is about embracing it, understanding it, and allowing it to guide growth. Every story of trauma carried the potential for transformation, every act of care became a lifeline, and every shared moment of grief strengthened the bonds of community. Spiritual guidance played a pivotal role in overcoming trauma. Many turned to prayer, meditation, or scripture for comfort, using faith as both a shield and a compass. Reverend Marcus often reminded his congregation, "The Lord does not promise a life without trials, but He promises strength to endure and wisdom to grow. Trauma may wound us, but faith can heal us." In the weeks following the explosion, these spiritual reflections became an essential tool for individuals and families navigating the tumultuous path of recovery. Community solidarity reinforced this spiritual framework. Volunteers, neighbors, and local organizations collaborated to provide emotional, logistical, and financial support to those affected. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, offered tangible proof that loss does not equal abandonment. Mrs. Nguyen, who had baked bread for displaced families, spoke softly to one mother, "You are not alone. We are here, and we will help you rebuild, step by step." Words like these, repeated countless times across shelters and streets, became the scaffolding for emotional recovery. Overcoming trauma also required reframing loss. Residents began to shift their focus from what had been destroyed to what could be rebuilt. Families salvaged treasured items from the wreckage, symbolizing continuity amidst change. Communities came together to repair homes, reopen schools, and restore businesses. Each act of rebuilding, physical, emotional, or spiritual, served as a reminder that trauma, while powerful, does not define the future. It shapes it, yes, but it also reveals the strength and resourcefulness within each individual and each community. Stories of courage and resilience inspired others. One young man, whose job at the plant had been eliminated by the explosion, decided to volunteer at the shelter daily, helping families navigate paperwork, distribute supplies, and provide emotional support. He admitted later, "Helping others heal helped me heal myself. I realized that even when you lose something, you can still give, and in giving, you find purpose again." These acts demonstrated a vital truth. Healing is amplified when it extends beyond the self, touching others with compassion and care. The path to overcoming loss and trauma was neither quick nor easy. It demanded patience, courage, and relentless hope. Families faced setbacks, individuals wrestled with grief, and the city grappled with logistical challenges. But with every meal shared, every blanket distributed, every word of comfort offered, Eastern Louisiana learned that the human spirit possesses an extraordinary capacity for resilience. In the weeks that followed, the city began to see glimpses of recovery, not only in repaired homes and cleared streets but in the renewed confidence of its residents. Children returned to school with smiles that belied the terror they had witnessed. Families reunited with neighbors and friends, sharing laughter, tears, and stories of survival. And through it all, a quiet strength emerged, rooted in faith, reinforced by community, and fueled by the unyielding determination to move forward. Trauma does not vanish. It leaves marks, memories, and lessons. But loss can be transformed into growth. Hearts can mend, communities can rebuild, and hope can flourish even after devastation. The people of Eastern Louisiana discovered that the fire had not taken their spirit, it had revealed it. And as they moved forward, step by step, they carried with them a powerful truth. Healing is possible, courage is contagious, and love has the power to overcome even the darkest trials. By embracing both their grief and their resilience, Eastern Louisiana transformed tragedy into a testament of strength. The explosion had brought trauma and loss, but it had also illuminated the extraordinary capacity of individuals and communities to endure, to care, and to rebuild. And as each day passed, the city grew stronger, not in spite of its pain, but because of its ability to face it with courage, compassion, and unwavering hope. In the wake of the explosion, the city began to understand a profound truth. Heroism is not always grand, and hope is not always loud. Sometimes, the smallest acts have the largest impact. A warm meal handed to a neighbor, a blanket offered to a child, a quiet word of encouragement. These simple gestures became lifelines, reminders that even in despair, humanity endures. Mrs. Nguyen, who had been baking bread for displaced families, noticed a young boy hesitating to enter the shelter. He clutched a torn backpack, eyes wide with uncertainty. She knelt down and offered him a loaf of bread. The boy's smile, hesitant but genuine, transformed her morning. She realized that in this small act, she had given more than food. She had given hope, comfort, and a reminder that he was not alone. Children also discovered the power of giving. Little Jaden, inspired by the kindness he had witnessed, organized a small collection of toys for children at the shelters. Each toy became a symbol of love and normalcy, bridging the gap between fear and joy. His actions reminded everyone that no act of kindness is too small, and that compassion, when multiplied across a community, can rebuild hearts as surely as it rebuilds streets. Volunteers shared similar experiences. A young man named Marcus, who had lost his home, chose to spend his days assisting at the local shelter. Though exhausted, he found strength in small gestures, helping an elderly woman fill out paperwork, guiding a frightened child through a maze of strangers, simply listening to someone's story. Each act reinforced a profound truth. Generosity and service heal both the giver and the receiver. Faith intertwined with action. Many volunteers and residents reflected that God works not only in grand miracles but in everyday deeds. Each compassionate act became a prayer in motion, an expression of divine love. Reverend Marcus often reminded volunteers, "Your hands are instruments of hope. Every small effort you make, every kind word you speak, is a testament that light exists even in darkness." The ripple effect was powerful. One family's small gesture inspired others to act, creating a wave of kindness that spread across neighborhoods. Grocery stores donated supplies, local businesses opened kitchens, and strangers became friends. In the simplest exchanges, the community discovered a truth that would shape the recovery. Hope is contagious, and every act of care matters. Eastern Louisiana learned that resilience is built not only in large-scale efforts but in countless small contributions, each one meaningful. The city began to see that even in devastation, ordinary people hold extraordinary power. And in this realization, the foundation for long-term healing was laid. Rebuilding after a disaster is more than restoring walls or repairing streets. It is about restoring hearts. As weeks passed, the city's residents began to repair what had been broken, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Every brick laid, every home repaired, every story shared in the shelters contributed to the restoration of hope. Mr. Caldwell, whose home had been partially destroyed, joined his neighbors in repairing the roof and clearing debris. Though the work was exhausting, he felt a growing sense of purpose. "Each nail I hammer," he said, "is a promise that we will rise stronger." His words captured the essence of rebuilding. It is an act of faith, determination, and courage. Community efforts expanded to schools and parks. Volunteers organized playground reconstruction, ensuring children had spaces to play and heal. Churches coordinated workshops for parents to guide children through emotional recovery. Every act of rebuilding became a statement. Life continues, and hope endures. Faith remained central. Candlelight vigils evolved into prayer gatherings celebrating recovery milestones. Residents shared gratitude for each life saved, each home repaired, and each act of kindness witnessed. Spiritual reflection became part of daily life, reinforcing resilience and deepening communal bonds. Rebuilding hope also required vision. Leaders and volunteers encouraged creativity and innovation, finding ways to improve infrastructure, enhance safety, and strengthen social networks. The disaster became an opportunity not just to restore, but to improve, cultivating a city more resilient than before. In this process, residents discovered that hope is not passive, it is active. Each step forward, no matter how small, contributed to a larger transformation. And as hope spread through the city, fear, grief, and uncertainty began to recede. Eastern Louisiana began to shine once more, not because the disaster had been erased, but because the people had chosen to rise above it. Every disaster leaves lessons. The explosion taught the city profound truths about courage, faith, and community. One central lesson emerged: adversity reveals what truly matters. Material possessions may be lost, but love, faith, and unity endure. Residents reflected on their experiences, realizing that tragedy tests character and strengthens resolve. Parents learned the depth of patience and compassion. Children discovered resilience and empathy. Volunteers and first responders found courage they never knew existed. The fire had not only challenged the city, it had transformed it. Spiritual reflection reinforced these lessons. Many turned to scripture, prayer, and meditation, seeking meaning in what had seemed senseless. They realized that trials are part of life, but so is the power to rise. Reverend Marcus told the congregation, "The fire tested our bodies, but it awakened our souls." In every trial, God's purpose is revealed, not to harm, but to teach, to guide, and to inspire growth. The city also learned that recovery is a collective journey. No single person or group could rebuild alone. It is through shared effort, empathy, and mutual support that true transformation occurs. Trauma can isolate, but unity liberates. Communities, not individuals, endure disasters. Eastern Louisiana emerged wiser and stronger. Lessons of faith, courage, and community became embedded in the culture of recovery. The fire, though destructive, became a teacher, a reminder that strength is cultivated through adversity, and hope is realized through action. As the city continued its journey of recovery, attention shifted from surviving to thriving. The people of Eastern Louisiana looked forward with purpose, determined to build a future informed by lessons of resilience and faith. Communities began long-term projects, rebuilding homes to higher safety standards, strengthening emergency preparedness, and creating support networks for future challenges. Schools integrated emotional resilience programs, teaching children skills to face adversity with courage and hope. Local businesses and organizations collaborated to foster a sense of unity, ensuring that no one would be left behind in the face of hardship. Hope became a guiding principle. Every repaired home, every reopened business, every reconciled family was a symbol of the city's enduring spirit. Residents shared stories of inspiration, emphasizing that while disasters may strike, they do not define destiny. Instead, it is the response to adversity, the choices to act with love and courage, that shaped the future. Faith continued to guide daily life. Prayer circles, community celebrations, and shared reflections reminded the city that life is sacred and resilience is a divine gift. Spiritual practices, intertwined with practical rebuilding, created a foundation for lasting strength and hope. Eastern Louisiana began to envision a future not defined by the explosion, but by the resilience, love, and unity that emerged in its wake. The city had been tested, and it had passed, not unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and united. Disasters remind us that life is fragile, but they also reveal the extraordinary power of human spirit. The story of Eastern Louisiana is not just about destruction. It is about courage, resilience, faith, and the transformative power of unity. Each resident, volunteer, first responder, and neighbor played a role in rebuilding hope. Every act of kindness, every prayer offered, every hand extended contributed to a larger tapestry of recovery. And this story is not confined to Eastern Louisiana. It is a reminder for all of us that hope is always within reach, even in the darkest times. We are called to act, to support those in need, to offer kindness to strangers, to nurture faith and courage within ourselves and our communities. Heroism is not only in grand gestures, it is in small, consistent acts of love and service. By choosing compassion, unity, and hope, we become part of the solution, part of a story greater than ourselves. The explosion challenged a city, but it also inspired a city. The people of Eastern Louisiana rose from fear, loss, and trauma to rebuild their lives and strengthen their community. And so can we, in our own lives, in our own communities. When faced with adversity, let us remember their example. Rise with courage, act with love, hold faith steadfast, and never underestimate the power of small acts to create monumental change. From the ashes, hope rises. From fear, courage emerges. From loss, love grows. Together, we rebuild. Together, we heal. Together, we thrive.